Hi, welcome to Philosophy All Along. So, I wanted to briefly talk with you about something that is hitting a lot of people really hard as we're coming up into Thanksgiving and as the holidays in general are here, right after a particularly difficult election, after one that's probably more difficult than any we've seen before in terms of its impact on kind of people's well being, their mental health, their relationships with other people in their lives. And so, one thing that I think we've seen a lot of people do is they've been changing their relationships, the way that they interact with others. A lot of people feel very kind of betrayed and hurt, right? So we're seeing, women divorcing their husbands. Uh, we're seeing people and friendships, people kind of go no contact, and that is tough. It's difficult, and for some of you, there might be this question of how am I supposed to respond? How am I supposed to deal with this? Do I still have to go to Thanksgiving? If I'm there, what do I say? What do I do? You might be experiencing greater tensions with your families or some of your friend circles, or you might be experiencing some anxiety about those interactions. In addition to depression, and I know for myself at the very least, anxiety and depression tend to walk hand in hand. um, they tend to feed each other, even though one's kind of forward looking in terms of, hi, this is our anxiety friend today here. He's going to This is Mr. Four. He's going to help us navigate this together. So the question, I think, becomes, well, what do I do, and is there a right way or a wrong way to deal with all of this? So number one, you're not crazy for having these worries, right? You're not out of line. You're not overstepping to want to distance yourself from other people or having concerns about it or having already done it. It's not crazy. It's not pouting. It's not being a sore loser. It's not any of that. So the reason why I mentioned this is I think it's profoundly unfair that some people are kind of treating liberals as if, well, they're crazy for wanting that distance, and that, well, this is just politics, right? There's a tendency to treat it as if, well, look, this is just politics. Why should it affect our family relationships? Well, the it's just politics is, I think, overused by the right as a way of dismissing concerns, right? Um, so, particularly for liberals, a lot of the concerns are things that have to do with care and concern for other people, things like school shootings, right? The treatment of immigrants, the treatment of people in Palestine, stuff like that. And so, whether or not you agree or have a particular side on any of those issues, they tend to be issues involving care. Like, I'm concerned about these people, I'm concerned about what's happening to them. And I've noticed that whenever there's like an event of some kind, usually tragic, like a school shooting, liberals will say something like, we need to do something about this. We need some sort of legislation. We need to make some changes. And the kind of catch all response on the right is, uh, well, you're turning it into politics and it's not about politics right now. Well, no, that's not correct. I'm not turning it into politics. I'm trying to address an issue that you've decided is politics. And so out there in some sphere that's separate from humanity, but it isn't separate to humanity any more so than concerns about slavery at the time were politics. And there were people who were saying that, well, don't bring, I imagine that there were people who were arguing about the morality of slavery at the dinner table, and people saying, well, don't bring that politics in there. But this isn't just politics, right? And the other thing is, there's hypocrisy to it. Let's be honest, right? Uh, Conservatives were so angry about the election last time that there were people smearing poop in the Capitol, right? There's people, they're not just protesting, they're storming into the Capitol. And sure, lots of people didn't do that, but they understood it, or they were maybe even supportive of it, or quietly sympathetic to it. So given the responses on the right to any Democrat election, as or Democrat winning an election, it's always got to be fake, it's unfair, so on and so forth. You finding yourself in the position of going, do I need some space? Do I have an experience with some friends or family that this just isn't working for me? That's not an overreaction. That's a There are people making choices that impact not just me, but other vulnerable people in the world. Um, and I'm not sure I want to continue to engage with them. So that isn't an overreaction. That is to my second point, a mental health reaction, right? You do have a right to protect your well-being within reason, right? Usually protecting our well-being stops when it impacts other people in terms of does them harm. Now, it is true that there's some people that you might cut out of your life or have distance from, that it will hurt them. And so that's something that, you kind of want to navigate and figure out in terms of like, do I want to do I want to be someone who participates in this person being feeling harmed about it? But that being said, this is not one of those circumstances where you're going out purposely trying to harm someone. You're making a decision in terms of kind of the space that you need and pulling back from a thing. And you don't have an obligation to other people to give them your well-being. I do generally think that we do have a moral obligation to try and help others and care about others, but there's a difference between telling family and friends, I will never help you if you need it. I don't care about you. You're bad, and saying, if you ever do need my help, I will be there for you, but I need space from this relationship. And obviously, if you're going like no contact, you might even be able to be like, I really can't help you. But people are grown, right? They can make their own decisions about seeking help and seeking support from people other than you. So while yes, I do think 100% we should do the best that we can to be compassionate to others, that also includes yourself. I think reflecting on, well, am I doing this because I want them to see that there is a cost? Like, are you trying to met out a punishment, or is it wholly kind of a matter of, well, I need space. It does me harm to be around people who I know that when they made their voting choices, I wasn't in their mind. Like my bodily autonomy wasn't in their mind, or I'm gay and they weren't thinking about the way it could affect me, or I'm trans and they weren't thinking about the way that could affect me. Those are fair questions, right? As is the question of, well, they made a moral choice about something that I really think is very wrong. And do I really want to have someone who makes that kind of choice, that supports that kind of thing in my life? And people might think it's hyperbolistic, but there really are points you can think about it where you're like, if someone is approving of a particular action, right, they're voting to support that particular action, say like harming children or something, you might say, you know what, I don't want that person in my life. I think that what they're doing is wrong. So all of those things make sense. It's you do not have an obligation to do something that harms you so that other people don't have to feel guilty, and you don't have an obligation to have people in your life knowing that those people, that when they're making a really large socially impactful choice, that they are not also considering the way it impacts you or your community. So again, within reason, you have every right to make the choice to protect your well-being and to have your circle be one that is supportive of you. Number three, there probably really isn't a right answer to this question at the end of the day. And what I mean by that is I've heard the criticism that, well, but aren't you just adding more division by creating this separation? Aren't you just creating more division? Well, firstly, again, no, and that's the height of hypocrisy, right? The fact that the conservative right is so comfortable with violent acts and angry acts, and things like storming the Capitol, and then acting like, oh, well, you're the one creating division. It's like, well, no, I'm just trying to speak up for the trans population, right? You're the one trying to carve out the trans population and separate them from society. You're the one who's trying to carve out immigrants and literally send them away, right? So this accusation that I'm just adding to division is profoundly unfair. What I mean when I say I don't think there's a right answer is that when it comes to our family and friends, the people who are closest to us, it is a perfectly defensible and not unreasonable answer to say, you know what, I want some space. It's also not unreasonable and perfectly defensible to say, you know what, I'm not going to remove these people in my life. I want to kind of bring them closer and change their minds. But you don't have an obligation to do that. That is a gift. It's a charity or a moral direction that you're taking in terms of like, this is the change that I want to make. But the people who are in your life, your loved ones, we're so much more vulnerable to them. So it's not just a matter of advocacy. When you go out to help people or change their minds or like make statements, you're usually not doing it in a way that's nearly as emotionally vulnerable as it is with your own family. And so when you're like, knowing that people don't approve and that they don't approve of you or your life, or that they're voting in ways that do you harm, to allow them to still be close to you so that you can hopefully kind of change their minds, or so that they can see your humanity and therefore they will support other people in your community. That's really a heavy thing to do, and no one has a right to tell you that you have to do it. And if you choose to do it, you deserve some credit for that, right? For that being rejected when you're going and knocking on doors trying to convince people of a particular something that you think is important, being rejected by them is not nearly as harsh as being reminded at Thanksgiving dinner that your family doesn't approve of you or your belief set. That's much tougher. So I don't really think that there's a right answer to it. I don't think that if you choose to have some distance, or if you choose to kind of continue to engage, neither of those are wrong. It's really a matter of trying to figure out what is best for you. And again, whilst I tend to be a big believer in the idea that we need to really think about our impacts on society, and we need to think about other people and help show care, I think that's profoundly important. It is also really important to remember that you are someone who also we should be giving that concern and care for, right? That care and concern for other people doesn't exclude you, that you are part of that, and figuring out what is also in your best interest is perfectly reasonable. So and to that, in terms of like what's reasonable and your rights in this regard, to number 4, you also have a right to speak up, right? It, if you decide to continue to engage, or to engage in these family holidays and things like that, and although this might add to your anxiety a bit, keep in mind you have a right to not have to be silent when people are saying things that are kind of quietly racist, or the microaggressions in terms of the gay population, stuff like. You have a right to exit, right? Like, no, I'm not comfortable with this. Here's the reason why, and I'm leaving, and that's a statement, right? That's a moment of empowerment for yourself, right? Standing up for your own well-being. And what's wild to me about it, and part of the reason why I think it's perfectly justifiable to, without screaming at people, without being unkind or cruel, but saying like, no, I disagree, or you're saying this thing and I disagree. You can wear your Harris Walls hat. They wear their MAGA hats wherever they want, whenever they want. Part of the reason why I think it's perfectly justifiable is that my observation has been is that amongst conservatives, they have, and not entirely incorrectly, constantly reminded the rest of the United States that they should have freedom of speech, and that they should be able to say what they want. And generally people like me who think, well, we should be careful what we say in terms of how it might harm people or how it might move society in one way or another, are seen as being like, oh, far too snowflakey and trying to censor and so on and so forth. So part of respecting other people is making sure to, okay, this is the way you're saying you want to be treated and the rights that you believe in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and maintain that, right? I happen to agree with that. So you think it's okay for people to kind of speak their mind, speak their truth, say what they want without censorship. That is me respecting that. So I do think that part of the difficulty is this feeling of like, oh, I have to be silent all the time, and they get to say what they want, and they get to put whatever bumper stickers they want, and I don't get to speak. Again, I don't think that speaking, some of the ways that I think people speak, particularly on the right, are particularly malicious and unkind. I'm not an advocate for that, but you do have a right to say, I'm not comfortable with that, or I disagree with that particular take. I don't agree with that perspective. And I'm also not comfortable continuing to have this conversation, right? Those are all things that you can say and that you have a right to say. Okay, number 5, my final thought here. So I do think that the most important point here is going to be that all of those things that we just discussed are kind of amorphous. They're kind of out there, right? In terms of like, what's the right thing to do? There's a lot of moral questions involved. There's kind of no wrong answer, but there's maybe no like perfectly right answer either. There's just the answer that works best for you and your well-being, which is something that you have every right to pursue, again, within reason, without doing, or overt harm to other people. You have a right to your wellness just as much as they believe that they have a right to their wellness. So I do think that the most important thing, though, is very practical and very much kind of on the ground. And it's simply the matter of, how are people speaking to you and treating you? Leaving aside like your comfortability with the way that they voted or their political statements and things like that, I think that for many people, what comes hand in hand with it, not always, but is a snide quality or a condescending quality or a patronizing quality, right? That they often have a tendency to, and this isn't something particularly to the right or the left, that just this is kind of family in general, that they know what's best, they know what's best for you. They know that you're wrong. Maybe they're condescending about it. Do they gang up on you? So I would really take a minute to think about, is the problem just a matter of kind of their moral positioning? And notice that I'm not just saying their political positioning, but their moral position. What is their take morally, and how comfortable or uncomfortable are you with that, right? That's all fair. I think also, though, we tend to ignore the fact that it's also really important to address how people engage with us. Do they engage with us in healthy and kind ways? Or are they, and you can think about this in terms of you. I don't have a specific, oh, this is the way, right? That it's bad or something like that. But do you walk out of your experiences with them feeling bad for some reason? And think about, well, what is it that's happening? Are they ignoring you? Are they patronizing you? What is it that's happening? Or is it just a matter of like, it's just kind of generally uncomfortable? But it's okay to kind of put your finger on it. And I think that that's important, because if you decide to speak out about it, people will always have difficulty hearing, well, I'm uncomfortable with you because of the way that you voted or because of your political or your moral stance. They're going to feel judged, and that's okay, right? Like you do not, your well-being does not include other people having to not feel guilty, no matter what anyone says, right? You don't have an obligation to make sure that other people don't face the consequences that they cause, right? It's okay to show people that they do harm. In fact, I think it's very valuable to do so. What I mean, though, is they're not usually going to hear that well. They're going to feel judged and so on and so forth. But they do, I think, will have a better sense of. They're not going to necessarily accept it more, but they will have. It's tougher when it's concrete and not kind of just like out there. When they are in a position of having to recognize, oh, you're uncomfortable with the fact that I speak to you like this, or that we as a family community gang up on you in this way. That's a concrete thing and a difficult thing to kind of just ignore. So that is something that I encourage you not to ignore either. That like, whilst we're dealing with this problem of being uncomfortable in a political and moral sense, are we also uncomfortable just with the way that people are treating us? And that is 100% something that you can put your finger on, right? You can hold up and you can show them like, no, my problem isn't just this. This isn't just, oh, I'm a sore loser. This is that you're rude. Okay, so to recap real quick. Number 1, you're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're not a sore loser. It's perfectly reasonable to be trying to figure out the kinds of people that you should have in your life and what's in your best interest. Number 2, along the same lines, it's okay to seek out your well-being within reason, right? You have every right to try and do what's in the best interest of your mental health and your emotional wellness. And that's perfectly reasonable. You have a right to it. Number 3, there probably really isn't a right answer to this. So however you do it, as long as it's like not out of cruelty, right? It's by the way, okay to show people like, yeah, elections have consequences. And one of the consequences is I don't really want to engage with you anymore, right? But as long as it's not being done just out of malice or spite or trying to hurt other people, there really isn't a wrong way to deal with this, whether it is pulling back or engaging more, right? As long as you are trying to do what is in your well-being's interests, and as long as you're kind of keeping in mind, trying not to do overt harm to other people. So you're doing the right thing. Number 4, you have a right to speak. You have a right to speak your mind. You have a right to stand up for yourself. And that includes the right not to speak. You have a right to exit a circumstance that you find uncomfortable. You don't have to explain to other people what it's like to be a member of your community. For example, if you're trans, you don't have an obligation to help other people understand what it's like. It's a charity. It's a kindness that you do, right? It can be helpful. It can help them, but you don't have an obligation to it. You go through enough. You don't have to help other people understand what it's like to be you. You can if you so choose, but you don't have an obligation to speak. You also don't have an obligation to be silent. And number 5, also keep in mind, just in general, not just kind of this amorphous moral stuff, but how people are engaging with you directly in tangible ways. Are they being unkind? Are they being rude? And it's fair for you to bring that up. And it's also fair for you to not bring it up if it makes you uncomfortable and simply exit it, right? So, okay, so those are my 5 thoughts on this. Okay, with that, and from me and from Mr. 4, I hope you have very happy holidays. And I want you to know you're not alone. You're not alone in your stress. You're not alone in feeling like you don't necessarily know what to do or how to deal with it, right? I know a lot of people who are going through that. And if there is anyone more on the conservative side who's watching this, well, firstly, I hope you know that I also hope you have happy holidays. I certainly hope I haven't said anything particularly offensive. I hope that I have included your voice accurately. And I do want to encourage you to remember that many members of your family or friends might be hurting right now. And whether or not you agree with them, right, that it doesn't help them to rub it in their face, right? That we all have tough times, and that if we really are family and friends who claim to care, that even if we are in different positions, even on different moral sides, that it doesn't warrant cruelty or unkindness. So with that, I just want to say I hope you do have excellent holidays. I hope they are beautiful, and thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.